Today, ladies and gentlemen, is an awesome day for me in technology because for the last weekend, I've been driving around a Tesla Model 3. Thank you to our great friends Nick and Randy from the Talos of Tech podcast. They rented one on their way up here. So no, before anyone gets too excited, I did not purchase one, though I would like to. And my goal is that the Model 3 will be my next car. Likely to purchase one within the next 2 to 3 years due to financial reasons. But regardless, being able to kind of test drive this one for the whole weekend has been an absolute delight. For those of you who don't know, I have ridden in a Tesla before, but this is my first time driving, and with today's video, I'm going to be giving you my experience, my impressions as to how I felt the Model 3 handled as a car. Coincidentally, happens to be the first Talos of Tech car review. Sit back, relax, let's begin. What's funny about driving the Tesla Model 3 between all three of us is that this is the one car I've ever experienced in my life where everyone was fighting to get to that driver's seat. Anytime we drove anywhere in town, we wanted to make sure, oh, I can drive, no, I can drive, no, I want to drive, but specifically so that we could not drive, because this Model 3, of course, was equipped with autopilot, which, for those of you who don't know, is not completely ready yet. It's not to level 5 autonomy where it can read stop signs, stop lights, and be completely autonomous. This is primarily helpful on freeways or for long stretches of road where there's not a lot of stop signs or intersections. It's just mostly about keeping the car within the lines, and it's kind of bringing what cruise control was to the gas pedal now to the steering wheel. The car should be able to know when to turn, or for a lot of times when you're on the freeway, just know how to drive straight. It shouldn't be that complicated. So the Tesla is capable of doing that. And anytime I do it, it just feels so unnatural and so wrong, and yet at the same time, so right. I still feel like this is the future. I feel like this is where automobiles are going to go. This is where the future of cars is going to end up. The car doing all of the background tasks for you. Obviously, you still have to grip the wheel, or the little hack we kind of figured out was just changing the speed on the little dials on the steering wheel, which, by the way, is such a better way to have cruise control. I'm sure Tesla's not the only car company to do this, but as someone who's used to driving a Hyundai Sonata, I will add that instead of having buttons to adjust your speed on cruise control, you just have these two little dials on the front of the car. The one on the left controls the volume, the one on the right controls your speed. It's so simple and it's so easy that when you take the car into autopilot mode, it makes you feel like you're the captain of a ship, because obviously we're not into that legal realm yet where you can just go to sleep, use your phone, and focus on other things and just let the car do its thing. You're still supposed to pay attention, observe your surroundings, and keep your eyes on the road, but when I'm not having to worry about steering, it feels like you're kind of the captain in the Starship Enterprise. Like, there's all these other activities going on and you don't have to worry about them. You can just focus on the main mission. So if someone's trying to figure out how the music or the air conditioning's working on that display in the center console, you can help them out with that because you're not worried about steering. If you're worried about the cars behind you on the freeway, or someone who might be passing you, or someone coming up on your left or right, you can focus on that because you're not worried about the steering. It allows you not just to be relaxed and do whatever you want, but also become more self-aware of your environment because your hands and eyes aren't having to focus on stay within the lines, stay within the lines. The Tesla makes all of that easy. And I know the autopilot is a huge reason so many people, especially in the tech space, are really into the Model 3. And it's definitely me too, but I'm certainly more excited for that full level autonomy that Elon claims will be ready later this year. But I definitely have a few doubts about that. We're waiting on a lot of the laws to change, but Model 3s right now currently have the potential to be full autonomous driving cars, but we're just waiting on those laws to be passed. So that's why it's not possible right now. Though I will just add, even without the autopilot, and while I am very interested in that, and once level 5 autonomy is ready, I am certainly excited to try it, there's so many other things about the car that are still a delight. Even if you don't get the autopilot version, there's a ton of little things that I think make the biggest differences. It's kind of like my application to iOS. Small changes and small features can really go a long way. Even if they aren't massive or impressive, sometimes they just have to be simple and intuitive. And even though this car wasn't made by Apple, a lot of the time it feels like they share the same ideologies. Keeping things clean, knowing that you, the driver, shouldn't have to worry about X, Y, or Z, and having the car take the lead. So for one, a very bizarre thing that you'll notice if you ever do test drive or ride around in a Tesla is there's so many things you're used to when you get in a car that suddenly aren't there. For me, whenever I've gotten in a car my entire life, there is a ignition process. Someone has a metal key that they put in the ignition, turn it, you hear that engine rev up, okay, now we know the car is running. It's so bizarre to me that that when you get in the Tesla, there's not that process. There's not that, oh, let's ignite the engine, let's light it up, and then you can hear it running. For us anyways, with the rental, there's just this little key card that you put in the middle, and once your foot is on the brake pedal, the car is ready to go. You either decide by tapping one little stick, do you want to put it in reverse or do you want to put it in drive to go forward and backward? There's not some big loud ignition sound. There's not some big key turning process. It all just works. It's all just seamless. And of course, the most bizarre thing that you'll notice about any electric car out there is once you start rolling, there's no noise. It's dead silent. That's one of the nice things about electric cars is they don't have this giant chemistry set sitting in the front. In fact, with the Tesla, you get more trunk space, which as we've shown this off to a lot of people in my family and my friends, that's always one of the most shocking parts of looking at the Tesla is opening the front of the car and just seeing nothing. Just seeing a big empty hole of trunk space. Like, wait a minute, you can just store more stuff in the front of the car? Yes, you can. Same with the back of the car. There is an absurd amount of trunk space where you can stuff your suitcases, and you see the inside of that trunk go way further down than a lot of people would expect because it definitely is more roomy than what most cars can do. Other tiny things that I think make the biggest difference are the door handles. They're not the classic hinge that you pull on and then when you lock the car, the hinge doesn't work. These little J-looking doorknobs have you push the thumb at kind of the curve of that door handle. And of course, when the car is locked, it simply doesn't open the door. But when it's unlocked, that handle sticks out and of course opens the door. And it just feels like something out of the future. And even though I feel like it's something Tesla really didn't need to add, like sure, it looks cool, but what's wrong with traditional door handles? Well, they're traditional door handles. We want to make something different. We want to try a different approach. And that's what I enjoy so much about this Tesla Model 3 is it's looking at things as if a car has never been made before, but with the present technologies available. It doesn't look at tradition. It doesn't look at the way things have been done. It just says, let's start clean, let's start fresh. And in a lot of ways, I think the Model 3 is designed for minimalists out there who want to keep things clean. I would have to say probably my favorite thing about driving the Model 3 isn't really the autopilot, isn't really the fact that it's electric, which a lot of people like, and I do agree, it's really awesome. Acceleration is impressive in it. But to me, the most impressive part about it is the design, because as cool as the outside of a car may look to you, you don't really stand outside your car and look at it all day. You're sitting inside it. And that's where I think the Tesla shines the most. This kind of new idea of keeping all of the user input on one 15-inch display. I think the software and the integration with the car work really, really well. Simple things like having a button to open the glove box always wows people whenever I'm driving around with them. I drove it with my grandma, I drove it with my dad, and showing them that they can access anything in the car, the air conditioning, the music, change the speed, plug in GPS navigation, of course, all of that being allowed to be controlled via that 15-inch touch display makes it feel like something out of a sci-fi movie. And I do mean that in a good way. As in, we've just been teleported into a car from the future. Tesla is thinking so far ahead and so more advanced than every other car company out there that they have kind of mastered what the ultimate experience of driving a car can be. It's definitely a learning curve for a lot of people. I've heard that some don't like the fact that all of the data for the car is on one screen because they're used to looking through the steering wheel and having their speedometer, having their RPM, having their fuel gauge right there. With this, I think it condenses it down into just what you need. When you're driving your car around, unless it's a manual, do you really need to be looking at the RPMs all the time? Maybe if you're into that kind of thing, but the average everyday driver really never needs to see that. Do you need to know if your tank is full or empty? Or do you just need to know how long the range is for a car? This condenses all that into just what you need. At the top of that screen, you've got your speed. That's how fast you're going. You don't need a big round dial that's changing like a clock depending on what your speed is. And by the way, half of that speedometer is almost never used. In fact, I see a lot of cars that clock their speedometer up to 140, 150, and it's like, when are you ever gonna go that fast? Why do you need all that extra space? That's what I mean by Tesla is not thinking of the ordinary. They're not thinking of, we want to make a car like this. They're just saying, let's make a device. Let's make an experience that gets people from point A to point B in the most clean, in the most minimal, in the most simple way possible. They're thinking outside the box. And as someone who's a big fan of Apple, and Apple likes to think outside the box, that's what I appreciate so much about the Tesla Model 3, is that design on the inside, no distractions, just that one screen that has everything you need and no more, which is why I personally even like the interior of a Model 3 a lot more than I do a Model S. Two screens with more content plus that displays in portrait mode, and don't get me wrong, the Model S is really cool and it's an amazing car as well, but personally the Model 3, the Model Y have much cleaner interiors that I get they did them to save money and to save on parts, but personal preference wise, even if the Model S and the Model 3 were the same price, I would probably probably still go for the 3. I just think design-wise, it looks more futuristic, it looks more aerodynamic, and that interior is amazing. The fact that there's just that one little gap going across the entire dashboard, that's where the AC vents are. You don't have to worry about how they're positioned or little dials or knobs that change individual features or air conditioning or volume or anything like that, which is what I'm used to. Just saying like, no, if you want to change the AC, it's right there on the display. You don't need all those extra buttons. It feels like when you're used to driving a Hyundai Sonata and you switch to a Tesla Model 3, going from a BlackBerry with all these buttons switching up to an iPhone. It's like, this is what you need, okay? We got rid of all that stuff that doesn't really matter and just let you focus on what does matter. I love the beefiness of the steering wheel. Even though I'm just driving it basically around town, I didn't rev it up or do donuts in a parking lot or anything. Simply just pressing the gas pedal, which feels wrong to say, acceleration pedal, I should probably say, and turning it quickly and going around corners really fast. You can tell this thing has a ton of power, a lot of which may not even be tapped into yet because we didn't have the fastest acceleration model. And I can only imagine what being in a Roadster feels like now that I feel like the Model 3 has an insane amount of power. But that's from a plebeian car driver. I haven't really been in muscle cars before or in anything too fancy, but regardless, I can appreciate this car for what it is. There's still a ton of little things that definitely need to be fixed. As much as I praise the Model 3, it's not a perfect car. One thing I mentioned is the process of switching from autopilot to manual driving, once again, is a little bit jarring. You know, if the car is going somewhere in autopilot where it's not supposed to go, and you grab the wheel, usually the other passengers in the car are like, whoa, wait a minute, you kind of jumped there for a second. I think perhaps in the future they could work on smoothing out that process. Like, hey, I'm just grabbing the wheel, you don't have to jump away. I'm sure they're trying their best. And I also know that they're getting much better at charging cars faster, as that was one issue you'll notice if you do ever rent a Tesla. You have to drive out to some supercharger and charge it up, or you can plug it into a standard 110 outlet, which is what we did, and notice that the charging speed was quite low, but that's to be expected if you're just plugging it into literally the same port your phone charges from. Yeah, you can technically charge a Tesla that way, but I wouldn't recommend it. We clocked it at around 6 miles an hour, which we basically called walking speed. Obviously, though, if you bought a Tesla, you could install a charger at home, which uses a standard 220 outlet, something like your dryer would use anyway, and that would charge the car much, much faster, so that every time you left the house, it's at 100%. But since we don't own the Tesla, since we don't have a charger built in, that was a little bit of a worry for us. Like, are we gonna run out of battery? But not to the extent that we couldn't drive the car at all. Still, every single day, we were using the Tesla to get from point A to point B throughout the day multiple times, and the range we got on this Model 3 was around 310 miles, which was perfectly fine. No complaints at all. We only had to take it to a supercharger once during this whole 4-day weekend trip. I'm very excited to see what Tesla has in store. I know that later in the year, Elon's saying they're going to be unveiling a pickup truck made by Tesla, which, knowing how they treat cars and how they rethink things, I'm very interested in seeing how they do it. But legit, everything they do with that Model 3 feels incredibly genius to me. The fact that you can look through the ceiling through that glass top, but they darken it so that you don't have to worry about the light beating down on you. It's not uncomfortable, but it's tinted just enough so that you can look through it if you want to. And once again, you can tell that the guy who designed this car also designs spaceships, because that's what driving around in a Tesla feels like. You're driving a spaceship just on everyday roads. But I'm sure there's probably a lot of people out there that have Teslas or have driven Teslas or are thinking about getting one. So I definitely want to hear what you guys think about your Tesla or the idea of getting a Model 3 down in the comments below. I had an absolute joy reviewing this product, and I'm so glad that Nick and Randy were able to give me this opportunity to drive it around myself. And now I'm definitely sold on it, and hopefully, if all goes well, my next car will be a Model 3. What will your next car be? If you were going with an electric or autonomous car, which one would you go with? All that good stuff. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I'll see you in the next one.